Hospitals are built on trust. When people walk through those doors, they are often at their most vulnerable. They rely completely on the people around them, doctors, nurses, and staff, to keep them safe. There is an unspoken agreement in places like this. That the people in charge of care are there to protect life. And most of the time, that belief holds true. But sometimes, that trust is placed in the wrong person. In the early 1980s, inside a pediatric unit in Texas, something began to happen. Children who were stable started going into sudden medical crises. Without warning. Without explanation. Their conditions would change rapidly. What had once seemed manageable would become critical in a matter of moments. At first, these incidents were treated as isolated cases. Unfortunate, but not unusual. Because in intensive care, unpredictability is part of the reality. But over time, a pattern began to emerge. And at the center of that pattern was a nurse named Genene Jones. Genene Jones did not come from a background that would immediately draw attention. Her early life was, in many ways, unremarkable. She was not raised in extreme circumstances. There was no clear sign, at least on the surface, that she would one day be involved in one of the most disturbing medical cases in the United States. But like many people who enter the medical field, she chose a profession centered around care. Nursing is often associated with empathy. With responsibility. With a desire to help. And for Genene, it offered something else as well. Structure. Recognition. A defined role in an environment where actions have immediate impact. She trained and eventually began working in pediatric care, a setting that requires precision, patience, and constant attention. Children are among the most vulnerable patients. They depend entirely on the people around them. And in that environment, trust is not just important. It is essential. Genene Jones entered that system as a caregiver. A professional. Someone expected to uphold that trust. When Genene Jones began working in pediatric intensive care, she quickly adapted to the demands of the role. The environment was intense. Patients required constant monitoring. Conditions could change rapidly. Decisions often needed to be made in seconds. And in that kind of setting, certain qualities stand out. The ability to remain calm under pressure. The willingness to step in during emergencies. The confidence to act when others hesitate. Genene appeared to possess those qualities. She was often present during critical moments. When a child's conditions suddenly worsened, she was there. When emergency interventions were needed, she responded. To many around her, this looked like dedication. Commitment. Competence. And over time, that perception solidified. She became someone who could be relied on in difficult situations. Someone who was consistently present when things went wrong. At one point, she was even recognized for her performance. Named Employee of the Month. A symbol of trust. A sign that she was not just doing her job, but doing it well. At first, the incidents did not raise alarm. In a pediatric intensive care unit, complications are not uncommon. Patients are already in critical condition. Unexpected changes can happen. But gradually, something began to feel different. Children who were stabilizing suddenly declined. Patients who showed signs of improvement experienced rapid deterioration. These were not cases where the outcome was inevitable. They were cases where the timing didn't make sense. Where the progression of events felt unusual. And over time, staff began to notice a subtle but persistent pattern. Many of these incidents occurred during the same shifts. Involving the same nurse. Genene Jones. At first, this was seen as coincidence. Perhaps she was simply present more often. Perhaps she was assigned to more critical cases. Perhaps she was responding quickly to emergencies. But as the number of incidents increased, so did the unease. Because patterns are difficult to ignore. Even when they are uncomfortable. To understand cases like this, it's important to look beyond the actions themselves. And examine the underlying motivations. Medical professionals who harm patients are often described as angels of death. It is a term that reflects the contradiction at the center of these cases. A caregiver, becoming a source of harm. The motivations are rarely simple. They are not driven by financial gain. And they are not always driven by anger. Instead, they often involve a complex mix of psychological factors. One of the most commonly discussed is the need for attention. In high-pressure environments like hospitals, emergencies bring focus. They create urgency. They shift attention to the people involved in resolving them. For some individuals, that attention becomes reinforcing. Another factor is control. In a setting where patients are vulnerable, the ability to influence outcomes, life or death, can create a sense of power. A sense of significance. In some cases, individuals may create crises. So they can be the ones to resolve them. To be seen as essential. As capable. As needed. And because these behaviors are often hidden within acts that appear helpful, they can go unnoticed for long periods of time. As time passed, the number of unexplained incidents continued to rise. More children experienced sudden medical crises. More cases lacked clear explanations. And internally, concerns began to grow. Staff members started discussing what they were seeing. Quietly. Cautiously. Because raising concerns about a colleague, especially in a medical setting, is not easy. It involves risk. Professional consequences. Reputation. Legal implications. And perhaps most importantly, the possibility of being wrong. But the pattern was becoming harder to ignore. The frequency. The timing. The repeated presence of the same individual. Still. No formal action was taken. Not immediately. Because suspicion alone is not enough. And in systems built on hierarchy and procedure, action often requires certainty. Eventually, the hospital made a decision. Genene Jones was asked to leave. But not as the result of a criminal investigation. Not as the result of confirmed wrongdoing. Officially, it was framed as a performance issue. Unofficially, there was discomfort. Concern. A sense that something was not right. But without concrete proof, the response was limited. And that decision had consequences. Because removing someone without investigating the underlying issue does not resolve the problem. It simply relocates it. Instead of escalating concerns to authorities, the system contained them. Quietly. And in doing so, it created the conditions for the pattern to continue. After leaving her previous position, Genene Jones found work elsewhere. Another pediatric environment. Another group of patients. Another opportunity. And once again, the same pattern began to emerge. Children experiencing sudden medical crises. Unexpected deterioration. Cases that didn't align with typical medical explanations. But this time, the incidents were more noticeable. More frequent. And the connections became clearer. Because when a pattern repeats across different environments, it becomes harder to dismiss. Harder to ignore. And eventually, someone decided to look more closely. When investigators began reviewing the cases, they focused on details. Medical records. Timing. Consistency. They looked for patterns. And what they found was deeply concerning. Some patients had been administered medications they did not need. In doses that were not medically justified. Substances that could trigger cardiac arrest. And when these cases were mapped out, one name appeared repeatedly. Genene Jones. The connection was no longer subtle. It was clear. And with that clarity came action. Genene Jones was arrested and charged. The case moved to trial. And during the proceedings, evidence was presented that confirmed what many had begun to suspect. She had deliberately harmed patients. Children. Under her care. In 1984, she was convicted. Sentenced to prison. But even then, the full scope of her actions remained uncertain. Some estimates suggested that the number of victims could be significantly higher than what was officially proven. Because in cases like this, not every incident is documented. Not every pattern is recognized in time. After the trial, the case raised important questions. Not just about Genene Jones, but about the systems that allowed her actions to continue. Why were early warning signs not investigated more thoroughly? Why were concerns handled internally instead of being escalated? How many opportunities were missed? These questions are difficult, because they don't have simple answers. They involve human judgment, organizational decisions, and the complexity of working in environments where uncertainty is constant. But they also highlight something important. That systems built on trust can sometimes struggle to respond to betrayal. What makes this case so unsettling is not just what happened, but how it happened. Gradually, quietly, within a system designed to protect. Genene Jones was not operating outside of the hospital. She was part of it. Trusted by it. Recognized by it. And that's what makes cases like this so difficult to process. Because they challenge a fundamental belief. That the people we rely on most are always acting in our best interest. And most of the time, they are. But sometimes, that trust becomes a vulnerability. Sometimes, the most dangerous people aren't the ones we fear. They're the ones we trust. If you found this case unsettling, you're not alone. Stories like this reveal how complex human behavior can be, especially in places we're supposed to feel safe. If you want more real cases like this, focused on psychology, deception, and the stories behind them, consider subscribing. And if there's a case you think should be covered next, leave it in the comments.